I was fined for having a fern on my balcony. He said he was defending the building's aesthetics, but he was the one embezzling from the condominium. Living in a well-organized condominium in the United States has its advantages: security, maintenance, a peaceful neighborhood, until the HOA, Homeowners Association, decides to turn your peace into a nightmare over something as simple as 3 potted plants. Yes, my balcony had a hanging fern, lavender in a ceramic pot, and a small wooden stand with a succulent. Nothing obstructing the view, nothing stuck to the outside. Everything clean, safe, and frankly beautiful. But last Friday, I opened the mailbox and found an HOA envelope. Inside, a formal notice signed by the building manager. Notice of violation: unauthorized items on the balcony. Fine, $125. Deadline for removal, 48 hours. I was shocked. I read and reread it, thinking I'd misunderstood. $125 for plants? Plants that had been there for over a year without anyone ever complaining? That same day, I contacted the building manager, Mr. Raymond K. Monroe. The kind of guy who carries a briefcase under his arm, speaks slowly as if he were in court, and acts like he's the building's sheriff. I politely explained that I always took care of the balcony, that the pots were on the inside of the railing, that there had never been any risk or disturbance. But he didn't even let me finish. The condominium rules are clear. Decorative items must be subject to prior approval. But they're just plants. Ma'am, the rules don't distinguish between plants, statues, or furniture. And in this condominium, everyone must follow the visual guidelines approved by the board. And then came the worst part. He even accused me of breaking the aesthetic harmony of the facade. As if my fern were an offense to the good taste of the other residents. I left the meeting feeling like I was being persecuted. And when I returned to my apartment, the humiliation grew. An anonymous note taped to the door. Rules exist for a reason. Some people think they're above them. Some people. It was clear. Someone had reported it. But why? Out of envy? Out of spite? Or was it just the building manager using the power he thought he had? I went to the residents group on the condo app. I politely commented, "Has anyone else been fined for plants?" Silence. No direct answer. But in less than 10 minutes, Raymond himself responded. As I said before, the uniform appearance of the balconies is part of our common agreement. Any attempt to violate the guidelines could result in sanctions. Sanctions? He used the word sanction as if I had committed a federal crime. I looked at other balconies. The one on 2B had a rolled-up rug outside weeks ago. The one on 4C had a hammock strung across the outside. The one on 3A? An LED sign with an American flag and a bull's skull. No one had been fined. Just me. Then I realized it wasn't about aesthetics. It was personal. It was an abuse of power. And at that moment I didn't know. But the person who should be under investigation wasn't my lavender. It was him. The man who fined me for a plant. Was hiding millions of dollars in debt in the condominium accounts. After that absurd fine, I started paying more attention to everything around me. Not because I wanted to make a mess, but because something about it didn't make sense. If Mr. Raymond Monroe, the HOA's elected manager, really cared about the building's aesthetics, why was I the only one being punished for unauthorized items? The balcony of apartment 4A had 2 red folding chairs, a small worn wooden table, and an umbrella held together with a broom handle. The resident of 2C hung wet towels every evening. 3D kept a bicycle locked to the balcony railing with a padlock. And no one, absolutely no one, got a warning. Just me. With my 3 plants. And it didn't stop there. The following month, I began to notice a strange pattern. Raymond turned a blind eye to some neighbors. The oldest, the closest to him, or the ones who, as I later discovered, voted in favor of his proposals at meetings. And he persecuted those who disagreed with him. A man on the 5th floor was fined for putting a doormat on his door. A 70-year-old woman received a citation for hanging a Christmas wreath before the permitted deadline. But a resident who kept a noisy portable generator running twice a week? Nothing. Another who smoked on the balcony and let the ash fall onto the balconies below? Nothing. The feeling was clear. He didn't follow the rules, he used them as a weapon. I began to talk discreetly with some neighbors. Most complained about him behind his back, but no one had the courage to confront him publicly. The reason? Fear of retaliation. He had already threatened to sue a resident for defamation after a criticism at a meeting. Another had his parking space blocked for weeks due to emergency construction, shortly after questioning a budget item. He was a veritable petty dictator. And worse, He relied on the HOA's bylaws as if they were the Constitution. One day, I received an email from him saying, "I would like to remind you that repeat members who question compliance with the rules are subject to a formal warning, temporary suspension of access to common areas, and ultimately legal sanctions." I read it more than 5 times. It was a threat. Veiled, written in legalese, but it was. But he didn't know I wasn't the type to cower. If he wanted a silent war, I would learn the ropes. I put together a small dossier. Photos, screenshots, comparisons. Plants on the 3rd floor balcony. A flag on the 2nd floor balcony. Items hanging on the 4th floor balcony. Everything dated and organized. Not because I wanted to go around handing out punishments, but to prove the obvious. It wasn't about the rules. It was about control. And at the center of it all was him. It was around this time that a new resident moved into the block next door. A discreet, polite man with the air of someone who observes more than he speaks. I later discovered his name was Ethan Parker. He works as a financial auditor at a compliance firm. And he too was targeted by Raymond. He got a ticket for leaving a toolbox in the lobby for 8 minutes while he went up to the store. Yes, Raymond was timing objects in the hallways now. But this time he messed with the wrong person. Ethan went to the HOA meeting and instead of raising his voice, he raised his hand. He asked for access to the condominium's latest financial statements. The building manager, nervous, tried to stall. "This needs to be approved by the board." Ethan smiled. "Actually, no. Under Florida state law, any resident has the right to access financial reports upon formal request. I'm making mine now." Silence. Raymond stammered. "Are you insinuating any wrongdoing?" "I'm not insinuating anything. But when someone punishes balcony plants so zealously, imagine what might be hidden in the spreadsheets." The tension in the room was almost palpable. Raymond tried to end the meeting. But there, the first crack in his empire had appeared. The next day, a group of residents, myself included, met informally. We created an observation committee. We began reviewing what no one had dared to do before. Inflated contracts, duplicate invoices, payments to companies with non-existent CNPJ, Brazilian Taxpayer Registry. And it all led to one name, Raymond K. Monroe. The man who claimed to protect the building's appearance. He was sinking the condominium into millions of dollars in debt. And if he thought my plants were the problem, he would still see what truly blooms when the truth comes out. When Ethan requested access to the financial reports, what had previously been a nuisance became a mission. He took it seriously, much more than I expected. The following week, he submitted a formal request, based on the Florida Condominium Act, demanding bank statements, balance sheets, payment receipts, and HOA contracts from the past 3 years. Raymond, the building manager, tried everything to stop him. He said the documents were under review, that the meter was tripping, that the system was migrating. Excuses followed. But Ethan wasn't just any resident. He knew the law. He knew the deadlines. And most importantly, he knew how to read between the lines. After 2 weeks of pressure, the building manager finally released some of the documents, printed, poorly organized, with missing pages. It seemed like someone with something to hide. And he did. In less than 48 hours, the scandal began to unfold. Ethan called me in to take a look. We sat in the community room with a folder full of scanned papers and an open laptop. First, he pointed out the contracts. "See this vendor here? Company hired for common area maintenance, lawn mowing, and window cleaning, $18,000 per quarter." It sounded normal, until he pointed out something else. This company no longer exists. It was shut down last year. Yet, the payments continued. "What do you mean?" I asked, shocked. Either the CNPJ was used by third parties, or someone created a shell company and is paying themselves. Then came the construction materials section. An emergency budget of $42,500 for repairs to the sports court, which honestly no one had ever used. The court? The one surrounded by weeds. Exactly. The receipt is signed, but no one saw a single team working there. Then Ethan showed the bank statements. Regular payments to the same account, with different names on the invoice. It was laundering. Or worse, pure and direct embezzlement. With each page turned, the frustration grew. What had previously seemed excessively rigid, like the fine for the plants, now revealed itself as absolute control over everything, so that no one would look where it really mattered. And we weren't talking about $1,000 here and there. The total whole, including inflated expenses, suspicious payments, and non-existent contracts, exceeded $1.2 million. The worst part? All of this had been approved at meetings, with a minimum quorum, poorly disclosed schedules, or with full powers granted to him by powers of attorney signed in blank by uninformed residents. It was a sophisticated scam, legally disguised, and deeply corrupt. We spoke to other residents. With evidence in hand, people began to talk. One couple said they were kindly asked by the building manager not to attend the meetings because they weren't in a decision-making position. Another man said he tried to report the matter once, but received a warning and had to pay a fine for hostile behavior, without even knowing why. Raymond used fear as a shield, and silence as a weapon. But now, the silence was broken. We put together a complete dossier with attachments organized by date, amount, notes, and screenshots. We created a private group among trusted residents. We scheduled a special meeting based on the HOA's statutory rights. We distributed invitations to every door. And in each envelope there was a simple copy of one of the fraudulent transactions. Just to make it clear, it was no longer a theory. It was a case. Raymond still tried to stop it. He sent a statement saying that any meeting outside the regularly scheduled calendar would be considered invalid. But Ethan responded with an entire paragraph of the law stating exactly the opposite, and attached the case number he would file if the meeting were blocked. Now the game was different. The week of the meeting, the mood in the building was tense. Some residents were afraid. Others were in shock. And one thing was certain. No one was afraid of the building manager anymore. They were afraid of the damage he had caused. And me, the woman who had been fined for 3 potted plants, was now at the center of the most important investigation in the history of that condominium. And on the day of the meeting, I carried one of my plants in my hand. I placed it on the corner of the table, and I waited for him to arrive, because now the one on trial was him. On the night of the special meeting, the community hall was packed. For the first time in years, residents showed up in force. There was no free pizza, no raffle prizes. There was a cause. The atmosphere was charged but quiet. Chairs filled quickly. I was in the 3rd row with my fern on my lap, the same one that had cost me a fine and days of humiliation. Building manager Raymond Monroe entered late. He wore a suit jacket as always, trying to project that image of authority. Only this time, no one stood to greet him. No one smiled. You felt it? Ethan opened the meeting firmly, his posture calm but implacable. Good evening. We are here by collective decision of residents, as permitted by our HOA bylaws. And today we're going to talk about numbers. Not plants. Not aesthetic regulations. But money. Our money. He projected the documents we'd gathered onto the wall. Bank statements, duplicate invoices, contracts with shell companies. Each slide was a punch. Each figure a betrayal. The total of the identified fraud exceeds $1.2 million. Money that could have been used for security, real maintenance, and improvements. Raymond tried to defend himself. He raised his hand and interrupted. That's a serious and baseless accusation. Everything was approved, everything is documented. But Ethan replied without blinking. Exactly. Everything is documented. Including the signatures you forged, the meetings you manipulated, and the receipts issued by inactive CNPJs. Silence. Hands began to rise. An older resident spoke. You made me pay $75 for a doormat, while robbing us from behind. Another resident. You blocked my access to the gym for improper use, while using our money to pay for services that never existed. What came next was swift. A vote. Unanimous result. Raymond removed from his position immediately. He left the hall escorted by 2 security guards hired by the HOA itself. No applause. No shouts. Just the weight of shame following every step. Days later, he was officially notified of the investigation. And yes, the authorities were called. The condominium filed a class action lawsuit. His name was splashed across the local newspapers as condominium manager accused of embezzlement in upper middle class condominium. And me? The neighbor with the fern? I smiled again. My balcony now has 5 pots. The new condominium manager, chosen by open vote, asked me to join the rules review board. I accepted. Today, I'm part of the group rewriting the rules, to ensure that no one is ever fined for harmless decorations again while the real problem goes unnoticed. You know what's even more ironic? The plant he ordered removed stayed. But him? He never set foot here again.